to bonus episode 5 of The Dive Down, a Magic Gathering podcast for the casual spike focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies in Modern and Pioneer. My name is Dave Harbarger. I'm here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Massachusetts, it's someone who describes himself as something of a death's shadow scientist, Michael Rapp.
How's it going, everyone?
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today. I just wanted to give a quick intro on maybe who you are. Maybe you can give us a little bit about your bio, kind of who you are, what you're doing, that kind of stuff in Magic, and then we can hop into a little bit of discussion about Michael's favorite deck.
Awesome. That sounds great.
So Michael is a player for Team Solitary Pro and a writer at Card Kingdom, and the winner of Grand Prix Toronto 2019. But I figure most people probably know him for his focus not on Modern, but on his signature deck, Death Shadow. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think more people know me for Death Shadow than anything else. But I certainly work a lot on Modern as a whole. You kind of have to, know the ecosystem around Death Shadow in order to really get everything out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so before we dive in too much to the Magic stuff, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of I haven't talked to Michael before, so I was curious about a couple of different things. So, I was wondering if you might just want to give us a little general intro on kind of how you got into Magic, what, if you have a day job you would want to talk about at all or anything like that, so people can kind of see, what the life of someone who has won a Grand Prix and things like that just kind of is like.
Oh, it's not super glamorous. When I learned to play Magic as a young child, and then played pretty casually kitchen table stuff for a number of years. And then I started, my first Grand Prix was in 2014, 2015. Whatever what was it? The Eternal Witness playmat was Richmond? It was like the 4,000 person Modern Grand Prix.
Oh, yeah, I think I remember that one happening, actually.
Yeah. So that was my first Grand Prix. As far as work, I'm a biomed tech, so I work at a hospital. Medical equipment breaks. They call me for basically everything that needs to be fixed.
Awesome. I'm sure things break all the time in
Oh yeah.
hospitals. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What deck did you play at that Grand Prix? Do you remember still?
I played Storm,
Storm. Awesome.
which was a fun deck, but I don't know that I'd want to play it again in a Grand Prix just because of all right, one red floating, one Storm, two red floating, two Storm, just for 9 rounds is a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was even pre-Baral, right? 2015 would have been before we had both cost reducers, I think, in the deck.
Yeah, it was just Electromancer.
Sweet. So I have a couple of questions that I thought would be kind of fun for us to go through just to introduce people to kind of the type of Magic player that you are, some of your Magic history, just really quickly. So I have a list of questions that I kind of am calling Inside the Grinders Studio, which is inspired by the great question segment from the old TV show Inside the Actors Studio. So I have 7 questions. We'll go through really fast. You don't have to give really long answers to these. But the first one is, what is your favorite card?
Thoughtseize.
Thoughtseize. Awesome. What's your least favorite card?
Urza's Tower.
You sound so much like me right now. It's amazing. It's perfect. What's your favorite format?
Modern.
Modern is. How did you come to focus on Modern as a player and content creator?
Modern is kind of just where I got to play all of my favorite cards. Before I played Shadow, I played a lot of Jund, so I got to play, Thoughtseize, Tarmogoyf, Dark Confidant, all in the same deck. And that was pretty attractive to me, and as the format evolved, I kind of moved with it. Jund became less good, Shadow became more good, so there are certainly parallels to be drawn between those decks, and I kind of just moved as time went on.
So what is your favorite moment when you're playing Magic?
I think my favorite moment, not specific moment, but my favorite times when I'm playing Magic are probably when you finally figure out the path that you need to win the game, right? It might not be as clear early in the game, and it might be a multiple turn plan, but once you figure out, oh, this, I need to sequence my next, 2 or 3 turns this way, and that will be good enough. I think that is probably what I enjoy about Magic the most.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. That to me has always felt a little bit like you all of a sudden are seeing the Matrix, sort of,
Yeah.
where it's like bullet time, where all of a sudden everything's in slow motion and you're moving in regular speed. And I definitely, it doesn't happen to me much because I'm not the best player, but I definitely know what you mean. Where all of a sudden you're like, this plan is going to work, and then you get to execute it. What do you think your least favorite moment when you're playing Magic is, other than when an Urzub's player completes the third land, apparently?
So it sounds like we're both, pretty big fans of Thoughtseize. So knowing your opponent's hand and then they cast a spell that you can't beat the next turn.
Yes. Yeah, the top deck is the worst. And then the last question I guess I would ask is, what is your favorite piece of Magic slang? Do you have one?
Favorite piece of Magic slang. It's probably Dees.
Dees?
Yeah, I use Dees a lot, even in non-Magic life.
Do you feel like, are you so I find myself sometimes like using Magic slang around friends who don't know anything about Magic. Do you get a
Yeah.
lot of
Oh yeah.
like sideways looks when you say something is pretty Dees?
People are like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "All right, so if something's decent, it's shorthand for decent, but that's not how it's used. It's like if something's pretty decent, it's pretty good."
Right. And you're like,
And
just
that,
finish the word. You know what word I'm trying to say. There's no other syllables that go with deep
yeah,
other than the
exactly.
word decent. Yeah.
Um, but explaining that dec doesn't mean decent, but instead means good, catches non-Magic players off guard
Yeah.
sometimes.
That's funny. That is definitely one that is new, like sort of newer from when I started playing. So did you say you started playing Magic in 2015, or did you start doing like competitive? When did you start playing in general?
I was like 6. So it would have been sometime in the Urza block.
All right, so I'm going to ask you like the big question, not big question, but just kind of like I've always wanted to talk to somebody who won a Grand Prix before.
Cool.
So my question is, what is it like to actually win a Grand Prix?
So throughout the course of that tournament, I spent so much of it trying to convince myself to be calm,
Sure.
that when I actually won, I kind of just like stood up and walked out of the feature match. And all my friends were waiting on the other side of the rope, and they were all ecstatic. So that was super cool to see them that happy. And it honestly didn't hit me until probably 2 days later.
hmm
Um, I'd woke up and I had my trophy like on my dresser, and I saw it and I was like, "Wow, that did actually happen. That's super cool." I think every competitive Magic player at some point in their life, has the goal to win a Grand Prix, win a Pro Tour, something like that. So
Yeah.
um, there was a lot of relief that came with it and a lot of validation that came with it. But on the balance, it was like a very surreal experience.
Yeah. And you've been to the Pro Tour a couple of times after that.
Yeah, twice.
That's awesome. And I saw you got pretty close to some PTQs this last weekend
Yeah.
too, right? While you're playing Pioneer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of misses on breakers.
Oh, that's too bad. When did you start making Magic content?
The Toronto was in February, so probably March.
Oh, just last year.
Yeah,
That's awesome. So you've written for a couple of different sites. Do you stream too, or are you more in the kind of written?
I do. I don't stream as much as I write, or even as much as I'd like to.
Sure.
Um, I streamed on Friday nights for a little while, but that's not great for viewer numbers,
Oh, okay.
both because of it being Friday night and people are out doing stuff, and Friday Night Magic is either like a travel day or an F&M day or something along those lines. So I'm kind of exploring different scheduling avenues. I've been doing like Saturday late morning, early afternoon recently. That's been working okay.
What's your goal in Magic right now?
Oh God. There's a couple schools of thought to that, right? Where some people say that tying your goals to certain results or milestones is setting yourself up for failure. Some people say that it gives you something to work for. So in the abstract, my goal is to just always play the best that I can. I'm a person who believes that if you play to the best of your ability and are always trying to get better, that the results will follow. So my goal, I guess, is to just always try to learn something from every match. I think the next logical step would be something along the lines of a PT top 8, even though that is reasonably lofty.
Yeah, but it's good to have big goals.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, so that totally makes sense to me. I mean, I think that it's great to be able to focus on process and results at the same time. When you're doing work, it's kind of like, okay, today I got this much better towards my bigger goal of X. So right now, before we kind of go a little bit deeper, because I want to switch over to talking about Shadow a little bit more specifically from here, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of mention all the places that people can find you on the internet right now to be able to find your content and things like that.
Sure. The easiest one is Twitter, and that is at Rapacious1, like the card from Rise of the Eldrazi.
Good coincidence there, by the way.
Yeah. In my pinned tweet is links to everything else. If you're looking for Shadow content specifically, I have a Discord. Link is also in that pinned tweet. Other than that, my stream or my Twitch handle is the same as my Twitter handle.
And then your articles are up on Card Kingdom.
Yep, articles are on Card Kingdom.
How often do you publish?
Every Friday.
Every Friday. Awesome. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the way that the Discord and the sort of Shadow Cabal came together. Was it because I know that there's a couple of different players that kind of think of themselves as Shadow specialists? Is the Discord kind of two or three different players got together and decided to start this Discord together, or?
So what happened was after Toronto, I wanted to connect with the other Shadow players, and I wanted to. It's funny because after Toronto, I was like, all right, it's time to get serious.
Okay.
So I wanted to talk to a lot of those guys, so I made a Facebook chat, and it was like me, Ben Jones, Zach Canner, David Caff, Dylan Hovey, Brandon Dalloway, and we kind of had a group chat for a while. People that weren't in the chat would reference the chat as the Shadow Cabal.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, Ben and I decided that we were going to start a Discord, and I was like, well, what do we name it? And we found it only fitting to name it the thing that people were already talking about.
I mean, that's good branding.
Yeah.
Just take advantage of what everybody's already doing. It's perfect.
Yeah, so Ben and I kind of started that. A lot of the other Shadow guys are in the Discord, either, talking or as mods or whatever.
Right. So I don't know a lot about Discord because I'm an old and I use Slack kind of instead. I mean, that's what we use for the podcast.
Yep.
Is there really that many people in there talking about Shadow all the time, or is it just sort of like a community of like-minded Magic players, or kind of both?
It's definitely kind of both. It is Shadow slanted, but I have, channels set up for Standard, Modern, Legacy, Pioneer, all that kind of stuff.
But it is kind of the place to go for up-to-date the tech that everybody's doing and all the different builds and all that kind of stuff. Probably.
Yeah. Like I'll post something, whether it be a card that I'm interested in or like an update to the deck list, and I'm actually checking how many people are here. Yeah, so there's like almost 1,300 people in the Discord.
Wow. That's awesome.
And yeah. So yeah, there's always somebody talking about something.
That's perfect. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the deck itself. So when you think about Shadow right now, I mean, how do you feel about the space that it sort of occupies in your Magic life?
It's certainly the deck that I play the most, enjoy playing the most, put the most time and work into. It is the deck that kind of got me where I am, right? And obviously to get to that spot, you have to enjoy what you're doing, and it has to be important to you. So it's kind of like a labor of love situation thing.
So we talked a little bit about when did you pick up Shadow?
Oh, it's probably been. It was on and off for the course of 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Did you go all the way back to when people were trying to put Delver in it and stuff like that?
I remember when people were doing that. I picked it up just after, like, at the very beginning of Grixis.
Yeah.
So after, like, the Suicide Zoo stuff.
Yep. Yeah. When it was less of a kind of an aggro deck, an all-in aggro deck with the Git probe and all that kind of stuff, and more of a tempo deck or kind of whatever kind of shell it fits in right now.
Yeah, so thinking more about it, it's probably sometime in early 2017, if I had to guess.
Okay. So, speaking of kind of the type of deck that Grixis Shadow is anyway, or the kind of builds of Shadow that we see most normally, what kind of the common Magic archetypes do you think it fits into the best?
It depends on what kind of Shadow deck you're playing.
Right.
Right, I think Jund is just an aggro deck. I think that Grixis is a tempo deck. Four color is probably a tempo deck. It's certainly a little muddier. Mardu is just a mid-range deck.
Can you maybe give me a little bit of your thoughts on the difference between an aggro deck and a tempo deck? Just in the context of the discussion, sometimes it's hard for. I think people kind of use those terms interchangeably sometimes, and they mean
Sure.
different things, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the difference is, right, take Zoo. Like, Zoo is an aggro deck.
Right.
And then if you branch out to, like, Legacy, like the Legacy Delver decks, those are tempo decks.
Right.
Um, so, like, one is just all about attacking, killing your opponent as fast as possible. And a tempo deck is more about disrupting your opponent while applying pressure.
And so if you think about where these kind of arrange themselves, so Jund you said was on that more aggro side by when it's Jund by itself,
Yep.
and then Mardu and four color, or sorry, not Mardu, Grixis and four color are in the kind of tempo area mostly because of the presence of counter spells.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
the blue cards really give it that Delvery feel.
right. Do you think it is kind of an analog to Delver in gameplay? I haven't played a lot of Legacy, so I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, when I was playing Grixis a lot, I would often call it Grixis Delver in Modern.
Yeah, that's cool. I used to joke around that Arclight Phoenix was the Delver that works, but
Yeah.
I think it turned out that that was kind of a different thing all on its own once that deck actually got solved. And then Mardu, like you said, is much more mid range because of its ability to grind, essentially, right?
Yeah, you play more copies of cards like Kolaghan's Command. You'll play Path to Exile. You have a higher land count. Unearth and Ranger Captain gives you a lot of longevity.
Why do you think that Shadow is the card that can be a keystone of so many different archetype styles? It's hard to think of another creature that kind of travels around quite as much. I guess in a way Tarmogoyf does. If you look at this same kind of lineup, there's similar kind of analogs there, but
Yeah, so I think the thing that Shadow does, it allows you to close games. Right? Jund was powerful for a long time because it had the best cards in the format. And now that new cards have been printed over time, that's not as true anymore. So they have to have a way to actually close the game, and they don't, which is why Jund has kind of fallen off. But Shadow is that kind of like Jundish deck that can finish the game. And a lot of that is because Death Shadow is a fast enough clock while being efficient enough that you don't lose tempo in order to try to turn the corner.
right. Why do you think it took so long for the card to kind of be discovered in modern?
It's a complicated card. For a card that only has what, like 2 lines of text on it or something.
And one CMC, one beautiful CMC.
Yeah, it's it's hard to find that shell, right? Because a lot of people are adverse to losing life in chunks, and you kind of it's a little strange because for a long time you've heard the adage that your life total is a resource.
Right, absolutely.
And people are like, I know what that means. That means I can take a hit here and there and not have to kill everything that enters the battlefield, which is true. But people really weren't maximizing life being a resource. You saw some of that in like old Magic. There was a PT between Finkel and Bob Maher, I think. It was the Phyrexian Processor Mirror. And I think Phyrexian Processor was kind of the first your life total produces a threat kind of card. And then a card like that didn't see play for a while. So people kind of just brush Shadow off as, some meme card that you had to like really, really build around. But once you have a Fetchland Shockland mana base and Thoughtseize, it's really not that hard to turn that card on. Street Wraith is 0 mana draw card in a lot of I think, to be fair, a lot of decks should be playing Street Wraith that aren't.
Oh, really interesting. What other decks do you think could run a Street Wraith without?
I think most combo decks.
Like you could say throwing it as a 4 of in Storm, basically.
I think Storm specifically wants actual spells, but decks like Ad Nauseum or something along those lines.
Yeah, where you're trying to filter more so than build a graveyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think there are a number of combo decks, like it could be right for Infect to play that card. It could be right for decks like Devoted Druid to play that card. But I don't think a lot of people are willing to take the plunge on Street Wraith, right?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting because it looks so different from like Get Probe, right? Which is, I mean, that was the thing I was going to say was that once people, and I don't remember who started out with the Shadow Zoo decks for sure. I just remember that Sam Black was kind of involved with some of the early builds with that. That once people unlocked that like Get Probe plus Thoughtseize plus Street Wraith kind of core plus Fetch Shocks to get your life total down really, really fast. And then I think if I remember right, those Zoo decks were playing Become Immense and Teamer Battle Rage as well to really kind of go wild with the really fast kill you combo. It was interesting to see that happen, and then all of a sudden it twists into something that is much more kind of tempo oriented, like you said, with the evolution of Grixis.
Yeah, it was almost a combo deck. I think early versions were also playing like Mutagenic Growth.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, and like Monastery Swift Spear, right?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was I want to say that was like a Josh Hutter Layton creation.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't for sure where that started a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, at that point in time, like I think all those guys are working pretty closely together, so there could have been a good amount of parallel development that went on there.
Yeah. And do you think it's that kind of finishing power that Shadow brings to a game that lets it endure through so many different metagames?
Yeah, because it is less about when you're playing Jund, for example, or Blue White Control or any other interactive deck, you have to get all of your card choices right. You can't afford to have like blanks in your deck, so you have to pick your removal spell removal spell suite perfectly. You have to find the right number of discard spells, the right number of threats. Shadow, you kind of just get to play the best threats, which leaves a lot more room for figuring out, how many discard spells you want, how many counter spells you want. And there's not a lot of decks that get to play discard spells and counter spells alongside each other profitably, because typically if you're doing that, you're not doing a lot else.
Right. Right. And Sultai has been sort of a criminally like underutilized shard, I guess, in Modern, right? There's always people who want to try to play those colors and they never seem to quite work out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is they never had a good way to finish the game.
Right. Do you think that Shadow, what does a bad metagame for Shadow look like? Or do you think that it just sort of morphs into one of the different archetypes that have sort of been discovered so far?
I think there is some movement, right? Like the Hogak metagame was pretty bad. Like Grixis was really bad.
Mm-hmm.
But Mardu had a good Hogak matchup, which is the reason that deck was playable. When Humans is super popular, things get, rough for Shadow. But if you wanted to beat that, like Humans was really good against Grixis because bouncing Gurmag Angler with Reflector Mage was like effectively terminate.
Yeah, exactly. Terminate on a body, right?
Yeah, it was Necrotal. As you move towards Tarmogoyf builds, that becomes less impactful.
Yeah.
Getting your Tarmogoyf bounced is still not where you want to be, but it is not nearly as bad as getting Gurmag Angler bounced.
Yeah, at least you get to just cast it again the turn later, where with Gurmag you just sort of have to restart your, you have to re-enable it via the graveyard, and who knows how long that's going to take.
Yeah, the graveyard decks are often reasonably problematic for Shadow, but even when they're popular, you see Shadow players playing, a pile of Surgical Extractions or some Ley Lines. At the end of its life, Phoenix was kind of rough because they had figured out. So at the beginning of Phoenix, that matchup, the Shadow players thought it was like very, very good. And as they started playing things like Pyromancer Ascension or Aria of Flame, that got a lot harder.
Yeah, because all of a sudden they were getting so much value off of every card that you couldn't really keep. The big threat wasn't enough to keep up.
Yep. Yeah, you couldn't really kill them before Pyromancer Ascension killed you. What else is bad? The creature combo decks that are very heavy on Veil can be tough.
That's a new card.
Yeah, yeah, Veil is kind of a beating.
Yeah.
Um, but Devoted Druid used to be like a reasonably good matchup, and I think now with the advent of Veil, it's probably slightly in their favor. Thankfully, they don't have Oko anymore. That was pretty awful.
Do you? What do you think? So you think the metagame right now is pretty favorable to certain builds of Shadow? Is the impression that I get.
Yeah, so I think four color's pretty good right now, just because you want to be playing cards like Veil of Summer and Once Upon a Time.
Yep.
And with that, you get Tarmogoyf, and you don't have to play Thought Scour.
Yeah. I mean, Tarmogoyf. So I've been playing. This is the deck I've been playing mostly. So I should talk about myself really quickly here. So I've been following you on Twitter for like a year, right? And pretty much ever since I saw you pop up from the Grand Prix. And Shadow is a deck that I'd been trying out a little bit, and I sort of just kind of whenever I want to try out Shadow, I really just go and like get your list
Okay.
and try it out for a little bit. I'm much more of a person who goes and plays in leagues than
Sure.
anything else. So I don't do a lot of paper competitive. I went to one Grand Prix last year and like played in side events. But
Okay.
I do like to just dust off Shadow once in a while, probably a couple times a year and play it for a bit. But I've been playing basically exclusively four color Shadow since like the middle of November until now on Magic Online, and just like loving the four color list. Even when Oko was around, I thought it was still like okay because we got to run Oko, but ever since the Oko ban the last couple of weeks, it's been felt like a really awesome deck to me. Mostly because, like you said, you get to play Veil of Summer and Once Upon a Time, and Traverse is sort of like your backup Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, so I think that when the deck played Oko, I actually hated that I had to play Oko.
Yeah.
But the card was such a high power level that you couldn't not play Oko.
You just could win by itself. I mean, I know it wasn't a card that literally won by itself, but like it could buy you time, or you could get enough threats out there to be able to control the board and then kill them. Like I definitely had during that era, I felt like I had as many games that I won off of Oko as I won off of kind of shadowing somebody to death. Essentially, it was nice to have a backup, kind of.
Oh yeah. So Oko was good in Shadow, but it wasn't a good Shadow card.
Yeah.
It was just powerful enough that it didn't matter.
Right. That's the
Um,
unfortunate thing about Oko, right?
yeah. I'm certainly happy that it's gone because we weren't a good Oko deck, and there were a lot of good Oko decks, so we would have to sit across from a lot of Okos, which was, reasonably problematic.
Just to like zoom back out for a second, I think that Shadow has a little bit of a reputation of being like a really hard deck for someone to pick up and play. Do you think that's true, or if you do think it's true, why do you think that what do you think is the most difficult part of picking up Shadow?
I think it is among the harder decks in the format. I don't think it is the hardest deck. Granted, a lot of the very difficult decks have gotten easier over the last um, probably year.
Mm-hmm.
I used to think Amulet Titan was really hard, but now they don't have to play bad cards anymore. They get really good cards, so that deck got easier. It's still fairly difficult. Lantern doesn't really exist anymore. That deck was really hard. So yeah, Shadow is among the harder decks. Um, what I see the most from newer players or less experienced Shadow players is just sequencing stuff. A lot of people don't understand the Mishra's Bauble Street Wraith Fetchland interaction, where you kind of get to build your own opt.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's definitely something I would love to temperature check with you and see if I'm doing it right. And I think it's
sure.
also you're totally right that people don't totally understand what that is for. For me, the question is always if I have a Bauble turn one, and I also have a Thoughtseize turn one, am I waiting till turn two to fire off my Bauble so that I can use my fetch land to preview the top of my deck and decide whether I want to shuffle away a card or not? You know what I mean? Like, so is it worth delaying until a second turn to be able to Thoughtseize somebody and just kind of have Bauble on the board?
So there's a couple of different ways you can go about that. if I have Bauble, Street Wraith, Thoughtseize, Fetch Land, and Shockland,
Hmm.
I will Bauble myself. See if I like the card, I'll play Shockland, Thoughtseize. If I don't like the card, I will play Fetch Land, get a land, Thoughtseize. If my lands are only fetches and I know that I'm casting Thoughtseize on one, I'll Bauble my opponent.
Okay.
That way you get a little more information to inform your Thoughtseize. If I know that I am playing against a deck with discard spells, I will Thoughtseize them on one usually and wait to Bauble until their end step. So that way you draw the card on your turn and, they can't take it if they have a discard spell kind of thing.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's a little bit like Once Upon a Time against a discard deck where you kind of hold it, and then if they cast a discard spell, then you go for Once Upon a Time during their turn, if so that you can at least get a land out of Once Upon a Time, and if they don't do it, then you do it on your turn, so you can decide with more information what
Yep.
what the card is. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that like definitely took me a while to think about in Shadow, because it's kind of like Mishra's Bauble seems like such an innocuous card. I think the first time that you look at it, you're kind of like,
Oh,
cool, I
yeah.
guess I just get to shuffle this. I get to like crack this and get a card. But I mean, it really feels like it's one of the pieces of glue that holds this deck together.
Yeah, actually, there have been a lot of people talking about potentially banning Mistress Bauble lately, before the Mox Opal ban. And I'm not positive Shadow would survive a Mistress Bauble ban. Definitely not 4-color, because it's so important to getting early Delirium.
And getting your Tormgrowth big, which is essentially the Delirium as well. But yeah.
Yeah, Grixis might survive a little more than 4-color, but Shadow decks they would take a hit if that card left.
Yeah, on the Grixis side, you'd probably see the reemergence of like Opt or Thought Scour, or not Thought Scour, Opt or Serum Visions potentially, depending on
Yeah.
the meta, right?
Yeah, I think you would probably likely see Serum Visions most of the time, but it does slow you down a lot, right?
Yeah,
It makes it harder to turn to Gurmag Angler when you have to actually pay mana to put a spell in your graveyard. But yeah, I think the 0 mana plays I think are where a lot of less experienced Shadow players make mistakes, whether it's Mishra's Bauble or Street Wraith. I see a lot of people just cycle Street Wraith on their end step or on their opponent's end step for a reason that I don't understand. Where if they just wait for their draw step, like they could draw Mishra's Bauble, and then still the Street Wraith in their hand to potentially draw a good card that they need that's on top of their deck.
so let me ask you. So the distinction there is that you want to try to use Street Wraith when it's not blind. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like you want to have try to have some idea of the card that's on top of your deck when you use Street Wraith?
I think you just have to have a reason to use Street Wraith.
Okay.
Whether it's pumping a shadow that's in play to shorten your opponent's clock. Like, if you can take a turn off the clock by cycling a Street Wraith, go for it. If you need to lose 2 life to enable a Death Shadow, go for it. If you know the top card of your library, go for it. If you need to draw a specific card that you don't have, go for it.
Yeah. But what you're saying is don't fire it off for value on turn 2 when you're just like, I got a Street Wraith. I might as well just get rid of it as soon as possible.
Yeah, even on turn 1, I'll have a Street Wraith, but I want to have a Bauble or something, and I'll cycle it if I don't have a 1-mana play.
Sure.
Or if my hand has all of a certain kind of interaction and not any of the other kinds, like if I have all removal spells but don't have a Stubborn Denial,
Sure.
and I'm about to cast a Thoughtseize, I'll cycle to see if I draw Stubborn Denial, because that might drastically change how I Thoughtseize.
Sure. Yeah, because you might decide not to take someone's removal spell because now you have something to counter it with, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is awesome because I got to tell you, I definitely have not been using Street Wraith right from the way that you're talking about it right now, and I wager that a lot of people also haven't been. And the reminder of don't use it just to use it, because it's pretty powerful to be able to just draw a card whenever you want to.
Yeah, if you hold it, you'll always have the option to use it. Unless you need to draw something very specific on your opponent's end step, there are very few good reasons to cycle it there, as opposed to just waiting to see what card you draw for turn.
Yep. That makes a ton of sense. Well, why don't we take a little bit of time and kind of go through? So I have the most recent build that you posted up today. Do you want to just kind of go through kind of card type by card type and just talk a little bit about each one in little sections, maybe? Because I think one thing that's really interesting about the Death Shadow deck, and this one in particular, is that the 4-color traverse build was something that sort of existed maybe a year and a half ago too. And it's interesting to see that kind of like come back. We already talked about part of the reason that it's come back is because of Once Upon a Time. So maybe the next kind of 2 cards to talk about as a set would be Traverse the Ulenwald and Once Upon a Time, and kind of why they're good right now. Although it's pretty obvious why Once Upon a Time is good. So
Yeah, I think Once Upon a Time being good is pretty obvious.
yeah,
When that card is free, it's broken in half.
yep. Do you think that's going to get banned someday?
I think it is on the short list.
Yeah,
Right now, I think the cards that are on the short list are Once Upon a Time / Veil of Summer. I don't know if they'll both go at the same time, but I can see one of them going for sure. Primeval Titans / Field of the Dead.
yeah.
I think Primeval Titan is a lot less likely than Field to catch a ban, but I think that something out of that deck is likely to go at some point. And I think it might be more down the line, but 3-mana Teferi.
Wow, in Modern even.
Yeah, once they kind of remove something from the Titan deck, I think Blue-White Control's going to be pretty good. And it's not even just Blue-White Control that'll be good. We've seen decks like Infect pick up Teferi.
Yeah.
It is a very powerful asymmetrical hate piece that...
I mean, Niv runs it even, right? Even in Modern.
Yeah, yeah. Asymmetrical hate pieces aren't typically super enjoyable. I guess it depends on who you ask, but cards like Blood Moon are the kinds of hate cards that I'm fine with, because in order to play that card effectively, you have real deck building constraints.
Yeah.
But Teferi says, I am the deck with interaction. The way you beat the deck with interaction is interacting with them back. And Teferi says that you can't.
Right. Yeah, and it just shuts you down, and if you miss that one window, you're just done.
Yeah. But Traverse Uvenwald is kind of something that you just get to play when you're already green.
Hysterically easy to enable in this deck, right? Because you have Bauble and Street Wraith already, and fetch lands, you're so far along that path to having Delirium active.
The way I ended up here was I wanted to try to fix the consistency issues that Grixis has.
Yeah.
The deck, when Grixis works, the deck is incredibly, incredibly powerful. However, that deck struggles to find threats on a regular basis sometimes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to try to fix that, and Once Upon a Time was a really good way to do that. And once I was already playing Once Upon a Time, Traverse Uvenwald is also a good way to do that.
Yep.
I've had a lot of people ask me why I'm playing 3 and 3 instead of 4 of one and 2 of the other. And it's pretty simply that I think the first copy of each of them is very powerful, and the second copy of each of them has a good amount of diminishing returns, especially Once Upon a Time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have felt like when I played this deck that I don't really have enough time to cast Once Upon a Time, hard cast it later in the game. So I'm much happier to draw Traverse later in the game, because you typically end up with so few lands in play that a lot of times what I want to do is traverse up Shadow and play Shadow in the same turn, and keep up Stubborn Denial. And so you can get in this kind of moment where you're like, well, I only really have 3 lands, so Once Upon a Time is just not going to get it done for me right now.
Yeah, that's certainly a spot. Because the difference between a 3-mana play and a 4-mana play in a deck with 18 lands is pretty big.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Especially, I guess I was going to say, especially in a deck with 5-mana producing lands, but we actually have 9. Which is more than a lot of Shadow decks, because we have Nurturing Peatland instead of what would otherwise be more fetch lands.
Right. Nurturing Peatland, which is just amazing with Shadow.
That is actually one of the other draws to be green, is you get to play 4 copies of Nurturing Peatland in your deck.
Yep.
Trust me, if they printed a blue-black version of that card, I think Grixis would be incredible.
All over it, yeah. That'll happen someday, right? Modern Horizons 2 at
Yeah.
some point. When they want to really mess up the format again.
Yeah. Hopefully they learn some lessons.
Yeah.
I guess some of the other things to talk about in this deck, 4 Mishra's Bauble is pretty standard. 4 Stubborn Denial, I think it is good against most of the decks that people are playing right now. There's not a lot of... That card, Stubborn Denial, is really only bad when like Humans is really popular.
Yeah. I mean, it's good even against, for game one, it's totally fine even against things like burn and prowess if you don't want to eat a lightning bolt, or you do want to eat a lightning bolt, or later in the game you don't. So I think it has lots of application, and just the fact that it's a 1 mana spell, of course, is incredible. I mean, 1 mana negate is pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, I even against Burn and Prowess, I think it's one of the best cards in your deck, even in sideboard games.
Oh yeah. See, I always wondered if I'm supposed to kind of ease up on those a little bit. I mean, I guess with that deck, I'm looking now. I might be sideboarding totally wrong because I'm not great at memorizing sideboards. But when I bring in like Collective Brutalities, I tend to go a little bit down on Thoughtseize just as a replacement because they're going to burn me out on their side. But
In those mono red burn-esque matchups, the first thing I do is get Street Wraith out of my deck.
okay,
And then I look to cutting Thoughtseize.
makes sense.
So against Prowess, you want to be able to take their 1-drop because that deck doesn't really work if they don't have a creature in play. Otherwise, their deck is full of like Manamorphoses and Lava Darts and stuff. Against Burn, a lot of the time they board in cards like Path to Exile or Deflecting Palm, and having enough discard spells to clear those out of the way is important.
Yeah.
But you certainly don't want all of your Thoughtseizes in either of those matchups.
Yeah. So at any rate, you have the 4 Stubborn Denial, which is kind of like the marquee of most of the shadow decks that have blue. Sometimes they go down to 3, but usually it's 4, which just for your kind of like creature protection for, when you get shadow out and you want to keep someone from killing it.
Yep. Yeah, it protects you. It protects your creatures. It is incredibly tempo positive. Being a 1-mana negate, it's going to trade up on mana with basically every spell, or at least be even. 4 Fatal Push is for, Prowess, Infect, Druid, there's humans here and there, the Shadow Mirror. It's very good in the 4-color Shadow Mirror.
Yep. Yeah, it's been interesting to see that you have a Lightning Bolt in the sideboard as well, which I think has a similar kind of purpose to Fatal Push in some ways, right? Like where you want to kill low CMC creatures, basically.
Yeah, so I both wanted a 7th removal spell that is 1 mana. I'm just counting Dismember as 1 mana. But I also wanted a way to kill Mirren Crusader out of humans and Druid. And I wanted a way to beat Veil of Summer out of Infect and Druid. I actually had a Renin 6 in my deck until recently.
That's the version the version I most recently took through a league had Renin 6 on the side, was Renin 6, which was pretty sweet in some of those matchups too.
Yeah, I took it out for a Kolaghan's Command, not because I think Renin 6 is bad, it's because I think that Infect and Druid aren't as highly represented as I thought they were going to be after the Oko ban.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the removal suite's got 4 Fatal Pushes, an Abrupt Decay, and 2 Dismembers main deck. And you've switched recently to having the 2 Dismembers instead of 1. Is that just to help with Urza, or where are you kind of coming from with that?
It's good against Urza. It's good against Eldrazi-tron, which is starting to pop up again. But the Primeval Titan decks are playing 4 Azusa, 4 Dryad of the Elysian Grove.
Yeah, it's so brutal.
So it's kind of hard to lean on Fatal Push. For a long time, the second Dismember was a Drown in the Lock,
Yep.
and I think on turn 2 against a lot of those Titan decks, it doesn't reliably kill their 3-mana creatures.
Yeah.
Which is why I moved to Dismember, because it both does that and it speeds up Arc Lock by being a pump spell for Shadow.
Do you feel like you kind of hover around 7 main deck removal spells
Yeah, it's like
when you're playing
6
this?
or 7.
6 or 7. Yeah. So we got the 4. We have basically have the 8 0-mana plays. We have 6 searchers essentially, or cantrips. We have the 4 protection, 7 removal spells. We have our 8 creatures in Death Shadow and Tarmogoyf. And then what that leaves is the Hand Disruption Suite, which is 4 Thoughtseize, 3 Inquisition of Kozilek, and the 2 Temur Battle Rage. So you said earlier that Thoughtseize was your favorite card.
Yep.
Is that how you want to start as many games as possible when you're playing Shadow? Is turn 1 Thoughtseize or turn 1 Inquisition?
So Magic is a lot of information game. It's an information game. It is a lot of figuring out what your opponent could have, figuring out what your opponent is representing. And if you have a discard spell, you just know those answers. So if I can start every game with a discard spell, I'm in.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Can I tell you one of the things I find the most satisfying about playing on Moto is when you hit the little reveal tab and you see the cards that you saw with Thoughtseize, and you get to tick them off
Oh
as
yeah,
someone
yep.
plays them, where you're just like, oh yeah, that's good. Okay, I remember all these. I mean, it definitely is the type of thing where, when I 3 or 4 years ago, like when Thoughtseize was in standard, I would be a little bit lazy about remembering my opponent's hands, and I wouldn't write it down all the time. And then playing more and more in Moto, I was like, no. Anytime I play Thoughtseize, I'm going to write down the hands
Oh
we
yeah,
want. I
you
cannot
have
afford to
to.
lose. Yeah, I cannot afford to maybe forget anything. Forget it. So there's just not enough room for an eighth kind of discard spell, right? It's just kind of not worth drawing multiple Inquisitions, basically.
So you could play an eighth discard spell. There are certainly people that play this deck with the fourth Inquisition, but I think it comes at the cost of either a Stubborn Denial or. So I think the three cards up in the air are Stubborn Denial, Fatal Push, and Abrupt Decay. If you wanted to make room for the fourth Inquisition, and I just want all access to all of those cards more.
So let's talk about Temur Battle Rage for a second. One thing that's interesting to me about this card is, I recently ran the build that you were talking about a minute ago, the one with Ren and 6 in it through like 3 leagues, and I never cast a Temur Battle Rage in like 15 matches. Do you feel like that? Like the burst potential is there, so you can kind of aggro somebody out. You can also get surprise somebody late game with it. It feels like it's sort of a card the deck gets to play, but isn't necessarily as intrinsic to the plan as maybe I felt like it used to be when it was pure Jund.
So I think Temur Battle Rage is secretly one of the best cards in any Shadow deck. Every time somebody asks me what I think about their Abzan Shadow deck or their Esper Shadow deck, my response is I'm not willing to cut Temur Battle Rage. It is the best counterspell because it kills your opponent. It is the best way to beat a lot of blockers. It is the best way to beat big creatures. It's kind of this weird tri-card between Berserk, Doomblade, and Counterspell.
Right.
One of the things about tempo decks is you trade cards for resources, or cards for time,
Right.
and sometimes you run out of cards. But Temur Battle Rage effectively shortens the length of the average game that you play with this deck, which is important because now we're not straining our discard spells as much, we're not straining our Stubborn Denials as much, we're not straining our removal spells as much, because we don't have to play an extra turn of magic in a lot of those games.
Right. It's interesting. It's funny for me. A lot of times, it felt like the threat of it being in the deck was almost as important as actually closing out games with it. Just because it's hard to be able to force yourself to draw it. It's almost like your opponent knowing that it's in your deck and that they have to remember that it's there is sort of as powerful as occasionally busting out a game where you go through one of those situations.
I get so much free value out of Temur Battle Rage existing. Draw your card, play your land, attack without doing a lot of thinking. People are more likely to think that you have it. And the number of creatures that my opponents just throw away because they think they have to try to beat Temur Battle Rage is a lot higher than I thought it would ever be. And on the other side of things, a lot of people won't block
Right.
because they think that you have it and they don't want to lose their guys or whatever. And you just get free damage in, and then you might draw out like the next turn or something like that. And because you got that extra damage in, you get to just kill them.
Yeah, or you just really conspicuously fetch up your blood crypt and just kind
Yeah.
of like stare at them. They're like, "What do you need that for? Don't worry about it. It's fine."
Yeah, the threat of it being there it's like a counter spell, right? Where if your opponent thinks you have it, you're always going to have it.
Right.
And sometimes not having it is better than having it. Because your opponent playing around it kind of adds it to your hand almost.
Right. Yeah, that's perfect. So, how many flex spots do you think really exist in this particular deck when you look at it? It sounds like it's like 3 or 4.
Yeah, it's not many. Street Wraith is core, Battle Rage is core, 8 creatures are core, Bauble is core. So I think that leaves you with like you can play. Some people play 17 lands, so I guess the 18th land is a flex slot. Other than that, yeah, there's probably like 3.
I'm sure you must spend just a huge amount of time thinking about each week, kind of like what update you would make to those 3 slots. I mean, between that and the sideboard, of course, because that's one thing I've noticed too, is that the sideboard tends to change a lot week over week when you guys are brewing and thinking about how to adjust.
Yeah, I spend a lot more time thinking about my sideboard than I do the 3 main deck cards. I've been playing the 18th land for quite a bit, I've been playing the fourth stub for quite a bit, so it's like kind of the do I want the second December versus the Drown in the Lock? Should Abrupt Decay be Assassin's Trophy kind of thought lines, but most of my thinking goes into the sideboard these days.
So let's talk about the sideboard really quick. What do you feel like is the biggest threat to Shadow in the metagame right now, and how are you kind of addressing it this week anyway?
So the biggest threat is probably, I think right now our worst matchups probably the Stoneblade deck.
Is that back? I've not played against one in a long time actually.
Yeah, people are playing Bant Stoneblade again, which I thought was going to die off after Oko,
Yeah,
but I recently, sometime in the last week, compiled all of the like reasonably finishing decks from Moto over the last week. So it was like decks at 4-1 or better, a prelim, or like 5-2 or better, the challenge or whatever.
sure.
And Titan decks made up a huge majority.
Yeah,
If you combine Titan Field, Amulet Titan, and Titan Shift, they had 11 copies. The
yeah.
next best deck was at 6.
Yeah, I noticed that in that showcase. So there was a modern showcase challenge as well as the Pioneer one last
Yep.
week, and we talked about it on the episode of the show that just came out today. And Dryad of the Elysian Grove was the second most played creature
Yeah,
in
which is
that challenge.
wild.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking to me in some ways because I was just like, I don't I don't play Titan decks. I really think they're annoying. I don't know if I think that they're like bannable, but it's just like not my thing. And to see it get such a huge shot in the arm across multiple versions of the archetype, I was like, well, that's a bummer, I guess.
Yeah, welcome to 2020, where our Valakut decks don't play mountains.
Yeah, exactly. That's so crazy, right? Like we just have the only mountain we have is the Molten Pinnacle. That's all we need.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So what are you bringing in against the Stoneblade decks?
So I want Lightning Bolt, I want Drown in the Lock, I want Veil of Summer, I want Assassin's Trophy, and I want Kolaghan's Command.
Mm-hmm.
Veil of Summer is a weird one. People might look at it and go, but their removal spells are Path to Exile. And I think the important thing is uh, some of them have started to play Archmage's Charm, which is kind of terrifying.
Yeah,
But if you ever get your guy bounced by a Jace, it's also really bad. If you get your guy bounced by a Teferi, it's really bad.
yeah.
Sorry, big Teferi. You can't respond to small Teferi as much as I would like.
Would keep trying.
Um, but one thing that you can do is with small Teferi on the stack, you can Veil, draw a card, and make it so they can't bounce your guy that turn, and then hopefully kill the Teferi on your turn.
And that's just kind of enough value. I mean, that's the thing about Veil of Summer, right? Is that it doesn't have to stop a card like count. It doesn't have to counter a spell essentially for it to be good enough to play. I mean, that sequence that you just said is totally enough value for your Veil of Summer. You get to replace it, and you still get to swing it with your creature. Seems totally worth it in the exchange in the long run.
Yeah, I think the scary part about that deck is they have access to Teferi, they have access to Veil of Summer, they have access to Path to Exile, they have access to Snapcaster Mage.
It's all the cards I used to play before I started playing Veil of Summer, or before I started playing Death Shadow.
Yeah, I played a lot of Jeskai Control and
Yeah,
Jeskai Delver way back at the beginning of Modern.
that
Um,
was the same deck that I was trying out at the beginning of Modern too.
so,
Geist the Saint Draft.
yep,
No.
Geist of Saint Traft, Restoration Angel, Delver.
Yep.
Yeah, that that was certainly a different Modern.
Yeah, I was gonna say those cards like don't even sniff it. The format in some ways these days.
Got to be able to beat the 2019 cards, man.
Yeah. So, as far as Titan goes, so you bring in Disdainful Stroke and Ashiok. Is there anything else that comes in? I guess maybe Drown on the Lock, just to be able because it can get big enough to take care of a Titan, but not. It's not as reliable as some of the other stuff you have.
It depends on the build of Titan. I
Okay.
like Drown in the Lock against Titan Shift, but not against Amulet or Field.
Mm-hmm.
Just because Titan Shift has like a lot of 2 mana plays between Secure Tri-Builder and Farseek and Explore and cards like that, that they'll have enough cards in their graveyard. And the important thing is that Scape Shift is a card that you play on like turn 5 that costs 4.
Right.
So you can usually counter it. But the big hitter on the sideboard against Titan is Aether Gust.
That's new because I feel like last week you didn't have an Aether Gust in the board.
I didn't, and that was actually the first place I saw that was Jonathan Hobbs talking about it. It beats Cavern of Souls and it beats Veil of Summer.
Because you can target it after it resolves, or
So Veil of Summer says that your spells can't be countered.
Oh wow!
Not that your spells gain hexproof.
Right.
So while it's on the stack, you can be like, okay, put it on the top or the bottom. It's not countered, but it's effectively countered.
Oh my god! I did not. It totally didn't occur to me when you were saying that it does not say. It just says put it on top or bottom of their library. It just says choose spell, put it on top or bottom of the library. It doesn't say counter.
Yeah.
Like remand, you know.
Yep. So it's kind of like a 2-mana counterspell. A lot of the times those games come down to like a crucial turn or two where you'll have a threat in play and you're like close to getting there, and then they resolve a Titan, they get Field of the Dead, and then suddenly you can't get through the zombies.
Sure.
So Aether Gust is a way to try to combat that. It's been pretty good. It comes in a couple other matchups. Like I bring it in against like the burn decks because I just don't want another Thoughtseize in my deck.
Right. It's just good enough, and it just sends a card away. And I've always found that the hardest part about being on the wrong end of an Aether Gust is like, am I really going to put this card on top of my deck again?
Yeah, sometimes it's just actual counterspell.
Yeah, I feel like frequently even it is, because sometimes the cards you counter are so just kind of not that important. But I guess if you do it to a Titan, they'll probably put it back on top.
Yeah, that one's staying.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you hit like a Boros Charm with it, like, are they going to put that card back on top of their deck?
Yeah, really depends on what's in their hand.
Yeah. And even still, I think the burn matchup often comes down to like having one extra turn on either side of the table.
Yeah. Yeah, the burn is like the classic matchup, right? I know you wrote a whole article on Card Kingdom even about the burn versus shadow matchup and kind of how to think about it. So
yeah, it's funny because one of the players at my LGS that I respect plays a lot of burn, and whenever we play, it's someone has lethal on the table and then dies, so it's kind of like man, if either side of the table had one more turn, this matchup is like very different. And I think Aether Gust is another one of those cards that kind of gives you one more turn.
Yeah.
I think anything that interacts on the stack, basically at all, with burn is pretty good. That card's actually sneaky good against prowess.
Oh, really?
Because if they like go all in, the Manamorphose, Lava Dart, sack a mountain, Lava Dart, try to attack you for like 6, you can just bounce their creature.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because the second half of the card, that totally makes sense.
And then it's like, do they really want to draw Soulscar Mage next turn?
Oh, the worst. I played a lot of prowess before Faithless with Looting was banned. I thought that was my other kind of main deck last year, and yeah, that would be brutal if people were all of a sudden able, like if Brazen Borrow had been around when prowess was around, that would have been pretty brutal for the prowess decks too.
Yeah, I don't even want to get Brazen Borrow, and I've had that happen. It is not good.
So what makes you think that right now that this is the best version of Shadow to be playing? Is it mostly Once Upon a Time and Veil?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I would do if either of those cards got banned, because I think the whole ecosystem would look relatively different.
For sure, yeah.
One of the other things that I was trying to fix along with the consistency issues in Shadow is if you ever draw 2 Gurmag Anglers, the second one isn't really castable a lot of the time. And the same is not true with Tarmogoyf. You can basically always find time to cast the second one. The downside is that it always costs 2 instead of costing 1 a good portion of the time. So it makes cards like Stubborn Denial a little worse, because you can't... Like, the sequence of, like, Thoughtseize, Gurmag Angler, Hold Up, Stub was, like, relatively common in Grixis. But now that's a 4-mana play.
Right.
Instead of a 3-mana play. So, Tarmogoyf versus Gurmag Angler certainly has its checks and balances. I would like to play Gurmag Angler if I could find a way to not have to play Thoughtscour, because Thoughtscour, when it's not turning on Gurmag Angler, isn't a very good Magic card.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on... I mean, I love Thoughtscour, but I also played a lot of Phoenix. Like I said, and it's a totally different thing in that deck, right? You're turning on so many extra pieces with that card.
Yeah, when you're enabling something with Thoughtscour, the card is very good.
Yeah.
However, if you don't have Gurmag Angler in your hand and you just have a Thoughtscour, you look at it and go, wow, this card is really not that good.
Yeah. What am I doing with this? I guess that I'm going to Mishra's Bauble myself and then get rid of the top card if I don't want it. Like
It's a
that's the
play I've made
ceiling.
before.
Yeah.
You can also do it
Uh,
on the other side of the table, which is cool.
yeah, when somebody looks, or you can have a look, or somebody puts something on top through some kind of tutor effect. Definitely.
Yeah, you Mishra's Bobble your opponent, go, I can't beat that one, thought scour you.
Bye. I will say that this is probably the most fun I've had playing Tarmogoyf ever. I wasn't. I mean, really, for some reason, it just feels like you get these massive ones out so much faster than Jund, and then you have Stubborn Denial to be able to protect it, and so it's just kind of this. I've won way more games with Tarmogoyf playing this 4-color shadow deck than I have in the past. I think ever probably.
Yeah, it is a better creature in this deck than it is in Jund for sure.
Yeah.
It just happens to be the best thing that Jund has access to, I think.
Totally.
In regards to actually killing your opponent, which they don't always seem to be interested in doing.
Right. They just want to kill your creatures and kind of hang out for a little bit.
Yeah, they're like, how many 2-for-1s can I get in one game? It's kind of a high score kind of situation.
Right. I guess one last question I had about this build, or something that I was curious about, was with the traverse package in here, why is there no like adventure creature, like a single Murderous Rider or a Gore Clan Rampager anymore? Is there just not space to be able to? Because there's often times where I've been like, oh, I drew another traverse, I'd really love to draw something that gave my Death Shadow trample kind of situation, but maybe that's just too complex for where we are right now.
So I think Gore Clan Rampager, if you're playing like a more traditional 4-color build, Gore Clan Rampager is a more attractive card. But this deck is almost like Sultai splashing red.
Mm-hmm.
So Gore Clan Rampager actually puts a good amount of strain on your mana base.
Yeah, you only have one source.
Yeah.
So.
Also, having double green in the same turn isn't always the easiest.
Oh yeah.
So if you want to traverse for it and play it in the same turn, that can be tough. As for Murderous Rider, I think it's a card that's close. I wrote an article on Jund Shadow, and it was right after Throne came out, and adventure creatures were cards I was looking at. Murderous Rider and Bonecrusher Giant in specific.
Yep.
Um,
They're so good. You just want to put them in every deck. The adventures,
yeah, it is. We have not had the opportunity to tutor for a spell before with Traverse Evenwald. Jund Shadow for a while used to play like a one of Shriekmaw.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted Murderous Rider to kind of be that, but I think it's just a little too slow.
It costs another mana, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like that 3 mana versus 4 mana play thing that we were talking about with Tarmogoyf versus Angler. It just ends up being a little too expensive on the balance. But I think there are certainly metagames where it could be good as like a sideboard card. If there's a lot of planeswalkers in the format, or a lot of large creatures in the format, like if Eldrazi Tron is pretty popular, that card gets a little better. Same thing with Bonecrusher Giant. If the demand for shock goes up, a lot, being able to tutor your shock is pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. And even being able, I guess, occasionally to just play it and then play it as an extra threat is probably reasonably good, at least.
Yeah, the body on Bonecrusher Giant isn't bad.
Yeah.
It turns on stub, it turns on TBR. Like, if you're playing it in a grindy matchup, your opponent, takes damage if they ever want to kill it.
Yeah. I've been playing that a bit because I've been playing that big red deck, the chunky red deck in Pioneer.
Yeah.
In there. I saw you've been playing Niv in Pioneer. Do you like that deck in Pioneer?
Oh, that deck is just a pile of cards that I love.
Yeah.
I looked at it and I was like, oh, this deck actually looks like it could be good. And it's just a pile of old mid-range haymakers that, from standard past that I just already have.
Perfect. Sleeve it up. Get my Sylvan Caryatids out again.
Yeah. But that's part of the charm of that deck, right? Is you could play whatever crazy old standard mythic that you have laying around, and it's probably good.
Yep. I'm so shocked at that. From where that deck was started to where it is now in both Modern and Pioneer, it's been really fascinating to watch. But
yeah, especially in Pioneer, I think there are a few groups of very talented players that I think have put a good amount of work into that deck, and I don't think it's anywhere near done yet.
Yeah, just so many options.
Yeah, there's I actually just released an article today on Card Kingdom that is entirely about building Niv Visit. And the kind of philosophies that go behind choosing your cards, and how many mana sources that you want, and like how to manage your flex spots. I think there's a ton of work left to be done in that deck, even after so much of it has already been done.
Yeah, I haven't tried that out yet. It's on my list of things to try. So we do this format on the show called Sleeve Believe Heave, where like after a new set comes out, we look at the 5.0 deck dumps and look for
Yep.
like new decks basically. And after War of the Spark, I played the first version, the first like Cave Dan, like Dan from Faithless
Yeah.
Brewing 5.0 list, and totally was like, I don't get what this deck is trying to do. Like I did terrible when I took it through the leagues. And I was like, I don't get what this is trying to do. This seems like kind of a meme deck. I don't know. And then 3 or 4 months later, Arkham's Astrolabe comes out and a bunch of other things happen, and then all of a sudden that deck's huge in Modern, and then it starts making it waves in Pioneer. It's really really cool to see. So I definitely want to go back and try it again. So just to kind of wrap things up, I had one more question I wanted to ask you about the
Sure.
mana in Four Color Shadow. So one thing I wonder about a little bit is just how do we beat Blood Moon with this mana base? Is it just a bit of a like concede to it? Are we trying to make sure we hold up denial against decks that play Blood Moon? I've always wondered kind of why there wasn't a basic forest, I guess.
So basic forest just costs too much to have in the deck, I think. You could play it over the 9th fetch land, which would be the Bloodstained Mire if you really wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think having basic forest in your deck is quite prohibitive because A, it doesn't deal us damage, B, it doesn't cast that many of our spells. It's kind of like Basic Island and Grixis, right? They play it because they have to, but you don't want to.
Right.
And I don't think that the mana is good enough in a 4-color deck like this to support Basic Forest.
Yep.
Where the mana in Grixis is actually pretty good. Um,
So do you feel like you're just trying to hold up Abrupt Decay basically so that you can tap it for mana when someone tries to resolve it, or
that's one way you can go about it. You can hold up Stubborn Denial. We have 7 discard spells.
you just kind of grab it? Yeah.
Uh, but the real secret is if you just have a threat in play, most Blood Moon decks aren't very good at killing Death Shadow and Tarmogoyf.
Great point.
So if you just go turn 2 Tarmogoyf and their play is turn 3 Blood Moon, you're like, all right, I could just kill them.
Right. You're like, I'm gonna hit you for 5.
Yeah.
And then now my Temur Battle Rage is on because I only have mountains.
Yeah. I mean, even if you just have to go hit you for 5, hit you for 5, hit you for 5, um, that just happens a lot because these red decks aren't very good at killing a 4/5 or a 5/6.
Totally makes sense. All right, I'm gonna stop worrying about Blood Moon when I play this deck, and just not just totally try to snag it with Thoughtseize, and otherwise just play my game.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the opportunity to like hold up a fetch land going into their Blood Moon turn so that you can get Swamp, go for it.
Yeah.
But the easiest way to beat it is either, Thoughtseize it or stub it or just have a creature in play.
Cool. All right. Well, I think our time is kind of getting close to being done here. I don't want to take too much more of your time either. Do you have any parting thoughts on Shadow right now, where it might go next?
I think the format is likely to stay in a similar place to where it is now, where like Titan is the deck to beat. There are a couple decks trying to beat Titan. My predictions going into this format after the Oko ban was that Titan was going to be the deck to beat, and the decks that were going to pop up to beat that were creature-based combo decks like Druid and Infect, along with fast spell-based combo, so like Storm, Ad Nauseam I thought was going to be pretty reasonable. And so far we haven't seen a lot of that. What we have seen is like Eldrazi-Tron, Jund, and Blue-White, which are
Right.
all decks that kind of just can't beat Field of Ruin. Or
Yeah.
not Field of Ruin, Field of the
Dead.
Dead.
Yep. Yeah. So Titan's just gonna sit on top of the metagame for a while.
Yeah, I think Shadow decks typically have a positive matchup against the Titan decks. So we're in a good spot by virtue of that. If these various creature and spell-based combo decks pop up, Shadow is traditionally very good against those decks, so that outcome is very good for Shadow players. If people continue to lean into Jund and Blue-White, it's a little sketchier. There are certainly things that you could do to combat that. Like I think Jund isn't as bad of a matchup as it was since the printing of Veil of Summer.
Mm-hmm.
If Jund is ever really popular, you can cut a lightning bolt or whatever and play third Veil of Summer, and suddenly that matchup gets a lot better.
Right.
Blue White's still a little trickier, but I'm not super worried about that deck being super popular.
And so for this time period that we're kind of in right now, until potentially we see, I don't think we're going to see a ban of Once Upon a Time or Veiled or really anything too soon in Modern, just because I think attention's kind of off the format for a little bit as far as Premier Play goes.
Yeah, I would
But
guess that the first time we see something banned is probably the end of the summer.
yeah, me too. So if you wanted to try to get into Shadow, I think this is a good time to do it. If you, especially if you're someone, one of our patrons, a guy that I talk to a lot in our group, Joe C is his name. He's just switching from Jund to Shadow. So it's really interesting to hear you say that you went through a similar path back when kind of Jund was on the downtick and you hopped over here instead. I think it's a good time to try that if you want to. If you have Jund cards, it's not too much of a stretch to get Death Shadow cards. So that's kind of a positive thing too. Um, so, Michael, I just wanted to thank you a lot for kind of hopping on the show with us tonight. And I wanted to give you another chance to mention. So you can find Michael on Twitter.
Yeah, at Rapacious One. Rappacious Oni. I think I spelled that right quickly off the top of my head. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a really cool experience.
Hey, I wanted to ask you. So you mentioned coaching too in your bio. I don't know if you want to tell people for a minute about, if they want to reach out to you for a coaching session, what that's kind of like.
Yeah, so typically I ask people that are interested to DM me on Twitter or message me on Facebook, something along those lines. My preferred style is leading up to our session, I would ask you to play a league or two with whatever deck that you want to focus on, and then we can sit through your replays and
Mm-hmm.
analyze those. The benefit to doing this over playing live leagues is the clock is not a concern.
Sure.
So we can really sit down and get into the nitty gritty of play lines without having to worry about timing out. However, if people do want to play live leagues instead, I certainly am fine with that. But we kind of lose a little bit of that depth
Yeah.
if that kind of situation does arise.
We'd stop and kind of zoom in.
Yeah, and I think those zoom in moments are where you get the most kind of learning experiences.
Look, the reason I wanted to bring up coaching is because you and I spoke for a long time just now, just about how to play Mishra's Bauble the right way, right? And so
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
anybody listening to this can tell that Michael has a great mind for detail. And so if you want to have somebody to kind of help check out your play and be able to talk to you about the second and third level reasons to execute plays the way that you are, reach out to Michael on Twitter, get a coaching session. I think it sounds like a fun thing to do for sure. So thanks again for joining us. That wraps up this bonus episode. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and a review. If you'd like to submit a question to the podcast or pick our brain about something in Modern or Pioneer, tweet us at The Dive Down or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can join our Patreon. These bonus episodes are brought to you by our patrons by reaching one of our stretch goals, and so they are brought to everybody through the excellent support by the people in our Patreon group. So I really appreciate that. Joining at any tier gets you access to our super secret Slack channel where we love interacting with our fans. It's patreon.com/thedivedown. Finally, quick shout out to manatraders.com for supporting the Dive Down. If you sign up for manatraders.com using promo code the Dive Down, all one word, you'll get 15% off your first 3 months of renting Magic Online cards. And as always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music, and again to Michael Rapp for joining us tonight.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you again. It's been a ton of fun. I always love the opportunity to kind of be on these kinds of things and talk to a different group of people, a different group of fans, interact with other awesome content creators. That's kind of the beautiful thing about Magic, right? Not
Yeah.
only can you play the game however you want, but you can kind of create content however you want. whether it be streaming, writing, podcasting, cosplaying, alters, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been the best, one of the best things for being, since we started this podcast about a year ago, is just to talk to other people who are as excited as we are. And I mentioned at the beginning of when we got on the phone that I have I don't get to get out to F&M all that much, or paper events, and so in a way making content and talking to people in the community and talking to my co-hosts is kind of the way that I get to participate in Magic right now for my life. And so it's great to be able to have this to be able to still be a part of the community. So I'm always grateful for other content creators and for the people who are willing to listen to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, certainly I'm sure this echoes in your experiences too, but the support of the fans are, it means the world to me that people are willing to come out and interact on a regular basis. And whenever someone tells you how much they appreciate your work, it is the best parts of Magic.
Yeah, well, definitely, I brought you on and wanted to do this interview with you because I'm a huge fan of your work and I appreciate all the work that you do on a deck that I really enjoy playing, even though I've learned tonight I'm pretty bad at it. So,
The secret is you're always better than you think.
yeah, fingers crossed. I will say I've had pretty good results in leagues the last couple of weeks, though, so I've definitely was excited about that. I have had some dry spells for a while where I was like not doing well with Shadow, and then lately it's been very, very good. Once Upon a Time is really truly a messed up Magic card.
Oh, it's obscene.
What do you have any events coming up that you're going to?
I think the next paper event that I'm going to is Star City Regionals, which is in March, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I have like a localish team trios tournament that I'm playing in the middle of February, um, which is cool. For those in the area, it is ELD Games or ELD Time Vault Games in Bellingham, Massachusetts.
Sweet.
Um, but
Check it out.
yeah, the last time I was there, it was pretty fun. So if you have the opportunity, swing by, check it out. Um, if you're in southern New Hampshire, my LGS, super cool. Next Gen Games and Comics. The guys that own it are honestly some of the best people in the community, so try to give them a fair shake.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much again, and I hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, awesome. I'd love to be back if you guys have a spot, but until then, this was a ton of fun, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great. All right. Have a good week, everybody.